welcome back to ECE 382. Kevin Byer here. I'm going to Module 14, Real-Time Systems. Make sure you like, make sure you comment, make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel. Definitely get some bonus points. All right, Real-Time Systems. So today we're going to look at interrupts again, but this time we're looking at how can we apply interrupts to real-time systems. So how can we get the least amount of latency so that our safety critical systems will take priority over anything else that's going on, and so that we can protect our robot from running into a wall and burning up the motors. We're going to have two different sections today. First section, talk a little bit about the theory. Second section, we're going to look at how to apply edge-triggered interrupts. So looking at the theory, we start up, an interrupt occurs. That could be any kind of interrupt, whether that's periodic, edge-triggered. Oh, pen's looking a little weird today. It's probably because it's not the rainbow pen. So interrupt happens, we perform some kind of process, and we return from that interrupt. That's the basic concept of interrupt. The big thing to note with what we're doing here in ECE 382 is we do not have no parallelism, but we do have concurrency. So the difference there, I don't know why it's looking so weird today. Parallel processor, so that's two processors working. We do not have that. So what we have to do is we have to break from our main. It's going to stop us there. We're going to go to our ISR. We're going to go through that until it completes, and we'll go back to our main program. So not doing two things at once. Only one processor, only one ARM Cortex on this MSP432, so we'll only do one thing at a time. All right, so different kinds of tasks. So we've seen periodic tasks. That's that timer A1, our SysTick timer happening at a specific rate. So this is timer A1 or SysTick. Independent of hardware. So no matter what's going on, at a continuous regular rate, a period is going to happen, and something's going to, the ISR interrupt service routine is going to run. Aperiodic, expected, so this is, we're looking for input or output, but it's not predictable timing. So this is our bump sensors. We know at some point potentially we could run into a wall and a bump could occur. Whoa. But we don't know when that's going to happen. So it's expected but not predictable. Sporadic is unexpected, so something went wrong that we weren't ready for, and it's also unpredictable. So those are the three different types of tasks that we could deal with interrupts. Again, periodic, regular rate, that's our timer A1. SysTick, aperiodic, expected but not predictable. We're going to see those along with our ports. And then sporadic, faults, things that we're not really planning for, unexpected, unpredictable. All right, so what is latency? Latency is basically the time how long it takes to service a interrupt. To let's say respond to interrupt. So we're going along. Our bump sensors are 1, all of a sudden we hit a wall, they go to 0. Remember, the bump sensors are programmed as falling as negative logic, so active low, so the bump gets hit, it goes to 0. But what we do in software is we flip that. So even though we flip it, and so that when you read bumps, it's going to be a 1 if the bump is hit. But what's really happening, remember, at the hardware level, is that we are at a 1 until we get hit, and then it's 0. So that is what we call a trigger. That point is going to trigger an interrupt, right? If we set up a interrupt to occur on the falling edge, and we'll see how we do that later, of a button press, this will trigger the interrupt. And then whenever the interrupt, say we have in that interrupt, it's going to take an LED and turn it on as soon as the bump occurs. So let's say that's the first thing in our ISR. So let's say our ISR takes port 1 on. What is? Let's look. I think that's one of the LEDs. Port 1 0 is the red LED. So let's do port 1 0 on. So this is port 1 0. And then it's going to go off. And port 1 0 is on again. Alright, so that's what our LED is going to do. So it's going to go on, off, and on. And then it's just going to stay like that. So trigger, and we'll see this again here in a second, latency is this time here. Response time is the time So this basically now is, okay, we just completed, this is all of our ISR does. We have now, we're here. And so the time between, to get rainbow out, here and here is our response time. Okay, so trigger occurs, so we call this one here trigger. Actually, it's start of ISR minus trigger, and this is completion minus the trigger. Okay, and that's going to give us our latency and response time. All right, so let's talk about priority. So every interrupt has priority. We saw this. We started setting priorities for our interrupts last lab. The thing to note here is that the lower the number, the higher priority. I'm running out of room. And just do, this is gonna go like this, we don't get confused. All right, so the lower the number, the higher priority, and a higher priority interrupt, will not be interrupted. So if I'm in an ISR, I'm running through here, my ISR has a priority of 0. That interrupt will not be interrupted by any other interrupt of the same or lower priority. Or higher number. Right, so if my ISR is a priority of 2, and we're running through here, and we're here, and then a priority 1 interrupt occurs, then we're going to trigger. We're going to exit this ISR, go to complete that other ISR and then come back to this one. So just remember, the higher priority interrupt is not interrupted by the same or lower priority. And then just remember, the lower the number, the higher the priority. Those are the two key things you have to remember for your priorities. All right, this is a little bit of a review on our real-time systems. So guaranteed bounded latency, so we have to respond in a certain amount of time. Those are our safety critical systems. From real time is missed deadline. We start losing some quality. That's going to be more of our data collection. If we miss one data point, but we're taking an average, or we're taking a some kind of filter over a long period of time, if we lose one piece of data, it's not going to kill us, it's not going to hurt us, but it will change the quality of the data. Delayed response. Reduces value of our data. So this, over time, just becomes less and less meaningful. And not real time, best effort, but no real deadlines. All right, pretty straightforward. That part's hopefully a little bit of a review. So let's take now, we're just gonna do both of these videos in one. We're moving along great. Edge triggered interrupts. So this is what we're gonna kind of focus on today. That's that idea of my pin goes down, falling edge. It can be rising edge, falling edge. There's a number of choices there, but we're going to look at in the implementation of the lab next time, looking at the bump sensors, we're going to be looking at the falling edge. But let's talk about periodic pulling. So this is what we've done now with time array 1A2 SysTick. Basically at a rate of every 10 milliseconds, we're going to stop and run the pull function. That function is going to look at the two pins and see what's going on. And if we take a look at the latency of that, so the time from when the trigger occurs to when we actually run the ISR, since we are using a periodic pulling, this time is not related to when the ISR does not start because of the change in the bump. The ISRs just happen every 10 milliseconds. So what we see is that a bump happens, and then 21.308 milliseconds later, we actually go through and turn, let's just say instead of doing this, the LED got turned on. So it took 21.308 milliseconds for the LED to get turned on. So this one must be running at about a 20 millisecond interrupt. This is not this. This is just an example up here, and this is a different example of once if a bump is hit, then the LED turns on, and we're looking at a periodic interrupt of 20 milliseconds. So it took 21.308 milliseconds. We're going to see later what that number, we're going to come back to this number, this is latency here. We're going to see what this number looks like if we use edge triggered interrupts instead. So again, this ISR at 20 milliseconds, the bump is pressed, and then about 21 milliseconds later, we then realize the bump is pressed, even though if we were, as we'll see later, if we were using edge interrupt triggers, this would we would know that the bump is pressed much sooner. But since we're only running the ISR every 20 milliseconds, it's going to take us some time to get there. Alright, so let's look at edge triggered interrupts now. Alright, there's our handy dandy interrupt controller table. So where we're going to go today, since we're working with ports, we're going to go down to these port interrupts. Specifically, we're going to look at an example here with one switch connected to port 1.4. We're going to look at that and see a falling edge event. Okay, and we're going to create an interrupt on this so that as soon as this happens, and we can look, since this is port 1, we're going to be calling the port 1 interrupt controller handler, which is right here. So as soon as this goes from a 1 to a 0, it's going to call the port 1 IRQ handler, and that's going to then run this function down here. So not a whole lot in regards to setting registers with this guy. We're going to configure our port 1 as GPIO. We're going to make it an input since it's connected to a button. We're enabling pull resistors. Remember, that's a two-step process to enable resistors. First, we enable the resistors. Second, we set pull up or pull down using the output. And we can look at those registers in the MSP432 guide to take a look at those. And then now we're going into a couple more of the flags, registers within that port 1. And these are all, again, that same section on port IO. So it looks like if we set IES, we get a falling edge event, and we clear the flag, and then we arm the interrupt. Okay, so this part's new. Again, that's in the port IO section of the documentation, and let me just grab that name for you guys again so that you have that to take a look at. But it is under data sheets, and it is the SLAU 356H. SLAU 356H. .pdf. Okay, so that'll be in there for you guys to take a look at. All right, so what we do need to talk about though is the NVIC, and we didn't really go into a lot of detail last time, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. So we take a look. We're in port 1. All right, port 1 IRQ port 1 IRQ equals it's number 35. So it's interrupt 35, which if we looked at the for priority, which registers handle IRQ 35, it's actually IP8, which IP8 handles registers or priority 32 through 35. And since we're in IRQ 34.5, it's going to be the most significant byte of the IP8. If this was interrupt 34, then it'd be the second most significant. 33, 32. 32 would be the least most significant bit or byte. So remember, it's 32 bits. And this is IP8 broken up into 4 bytes. This is going to be priority or interrupt 32. 33, 34, and 35. So we're going to clear this most significant byte, which we do here. Then we're going to set it to priority 2. All right, so how does this work? So we are setting bits 31 to 29. So if we go within this range here, if we go to 31 to 29, so this is 32 bits, so 0 to 31, 30, bit 32, 31, 30, and 29 are going to be the bits that are responsible for what priority and of this, and we set it to a 4, this half byte or nibble to a 4, which gives us, let me just double check that, 31, sorry, so we're setting these 3 to a 4, So we're setting this whole byte to a 4, which is 1, 0. But if we look at 31 through 29, that's going to be a 2. No, I did that wrong. Let's do that again. Reset. 31, 30, 29, 28. There we go. We're setting this nibble, which is 0x4 here, to 4. There we go. But what the priority is looking at is 31 through 29, which are these 3 bits, which if we take a look at that, that is equal to a 2, which is a priority of 2. That makes more sense. Sorry about that, guys. In the lab, it's easy. We're going to set it to priority 0, so you can just set it all to 0. And if we take a look at the ISER, which actually enables the interrupt, ISER 0 deals with interrupts 0 to 31. We're looking at ISER 1, which deals with interrupts 32 through 63. The one we're specifically looking at is obviously ISR 35. So to figure out which bit we have to activate, we take 35 minus 32, which gets us 3. So we need to set bit 3 equal to a 1. And so bit 3 is 0, 1, 0, 1, 2, 3. And that is 0x08. And so that's why we enable, we set bit 8. So if I was looking at interrupt 30, it would be the 30th bit within the ISER 0. But looking at anything greater than 31, we have to go to ISER 1. And obviously not going to set the 35th bit of ISER 1 because it's only 32 bits. So we are going to set 35 minus 32, which is equal to 3, so we're setting the 3rd bit, and that's why we got an 8 there. So you're going to have to figure that stuff out for the lab, but I feel like you guys can figure it out. And then once that interrupt occurs, so once we go from P1.4, once that goes from a 1 to 0, we're going to call this interrupt controller. It's going to toggle the LEDs, clear the flag, you're going to have to do that, and then that's pretty much it. So we're going to take a look at what this will look like for our lab here in a little bit. But I just wanted to give you an example of one port, one pin, and then we'll take a look at that other for the lab, because we're going to have 6 pins on port 4. It's going to be a little bit different, but we'll take a look at that. But the key thing you're going to definitely do in our portion of the lab is clear that flag, because that allows then later interrupts to occur. Now if we have multiple switches, and say these switches are on different ports, this is different than what we're going to do in the lab because all of our switches are on port 4. But this one, just example, gives you an idea of how you would deal with this if it was on different ports. So port 5 and port 6 here. So we're going to have to initialize both port 5 and port 6. They're going to have different NVIC controllers because if we look back up here, port 5 is interrupt 39, port 6 is interrupt 40. So just so that we can take another look, here's IP10. IP10 is going to deal with interrupts 40, 41, 42, and 43. 40 is going to be at the least significant byte, so that's why we're clearing here those bytes. 40 is looking at bits 7 and 5, 7 through 5 of IP10. So if we go into IP10, we take bits 7 and 5, so let's go 8. Let's just do it like this. 7, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay, so that's that first byte. We break it up here. We're setting it to 40. All right, so 40. Don't know what happened to 6. There we go. All right. 40, it's going to set this guy here to 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And if we take a look at our controller here, bits 7 through 5 are where we find the priority of interrupt 40. So if I look at bits 7 through 5 here, I have a priority of 2 again. All right. And then we go to ISER1, which again is ISER1 is 63 down to 632. So I take 63, no, sorry, I take 40, because we're at interrupt 40, minus 32, equals 8. And I'm going to set bit 8, which if I take a look at that, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That is going to be 0, 0, 1. So that's why here for ISER1 we're setting interrupt 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0. All right. So again, once that we're doing rising edge this time. So rising edge occurs. Say this is port 6. We go here, we clear the flag, and we set the switch. So that's what we're doing with 2, and we can see here we have to have port 5 and port 6 interrupts. If they were both on port 5, we could do it a little bit differently. There's so port 5, we'd still run the IRQ handler, but we can take and set our port in. We have this IV register. What the IV register is going to do, the IV is going to take the least, the lowest pin that has an interrupt. So say we have port 5, pin 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0, and say those are connected to bump sensors, and 4, 3, 2 are all bumped at the same time. So 4, 3, 2 all happen at the same time. IV is going to tell us that port 5.2 is set. So that's not useful for us because we sometimes want to know which of the bump sensors are set. Not as useful. Going back to this 2 different ports here, they're both set to priority 2. Both of them are. And so if both switches were to happen at the same time, or you can't have it at the exact same time, whichever happens first is going to be processed, and then that's going to get cleared, and then the next one's going to occur. So because they're the same priority, say we were processing this one, it would not be interrupted by port 6 because they're the same priority. All right, so that's multi-switch edge interrupt. But we're doing here for both of these, so falling edge interrupt, single switch, 2 switches, rising edge. Basic same idea. It's the IRQ handler is going to get called. We set up the ports pretty much the same way. Remember, for our lab, we're going to be using falling edge. So look at that one. But if I take a look now and basically, I'm going to take a look at the ISR, which is going to at the beginning, it's going to set the red LED, and then at the end, it's going to clear blue LED. Okay, so that's what our ISR is doing. I don't know why I went to this dark black. Let's go rainbow. Let's get some rainbow in this. All right. So if I take a look at my bump, which is going to be falling edge, the trigger happens right there, and the latency now between when the trigger happens and the ISR begins, so the red LED gets set. We can see that here. So latency now is 2 microseconds. And that is the same, so this is the same ISR that we saw before, but instead of periodic interrupts where we check every 20 milliseconds, now we're going to do a falling edge interrupt. So as soon as that bump is pressed, the ISR gets called with a latency of 2 microseconds versus that 21 milliseconds. And then we're going to run through the ISR, and once the ISR is complete, this is response time. And that's a full 68 microseconds. So we not only called the ISR, we completed the ISR before we would have even started the ISR if we were looking at periodic interrupts. So this is the power of edge triggered interrupts. 2 microseconds. If we hit the bump, and in this ISR we say motor off, that's pretty good. That's going to be exactly what we want. All right, so let's talk about the lab real quick, and then we'll see where our timers are once we complete the lab. So lab, we're working on port 4, specifically port 4, pin 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 0. Okay, so we're going to be doing falling edge. And port 4, let's go back up here. Port 4 is 38 with 23 through 21. So $38, and the priority bits are equal to, what was it? 23 through 21. So we're going to be using IP9, which IP9 handles interrupts 36 through 39. So 38 obviously is going to be the second most significant byte. So if we take a look at our IP9, broken up into 4 bytes, this is where we're going to have to clear right here. So this is 38, 39, 7, 36. Okay, and then within that, we're going to set the priority to 0, so you can just set those to 0. We're going to OR 0x 0 zeros. And the reason we OR is because we've cleared this. We're going to leave all of these the same. So ORing with 0 will then keep these as 0, as whatever they were previously. It's going to make sure this stays at 0, and it's going to set these. It's going to stay the same. And then the ISER, which is which enables the interrupt, is ISER1, which ISER1 does 0 to 31. Nope, it's a lie. ISER0 does 30 to 31. This is what was it, 63 to 32. So if we take 38 minus 32, that means we have to set bit 6. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing in the NVIC. So that's those last 2 lines. It's all port 4, so we only need to enable the registers for port 4. All right, so now let's talk about what our interrupt controller is going to do, or our ISR. So in the past, we've done something along the lines. So take a look at timer A1 in the past. We had a timer A1 task, right? And what would happen in our it was the timer A1, so TA10 IRQ handler. We would pass in a pointer to the function that we wanted to call, and that function had no inputs. All right, so what we're going to do differently this time is we're still going to use a pointer to a function, but and that function is going to be collision. And that's just, so when we did our, sorry, let's go back to the past. It's like a Quentin Tarantino movie where when we initialized, we use the address of check bumper, and all was good. And then, whatever frequency we needed. Well, this time we're going to use bump task, and we're actually going to pass an input to the bump task. And if you think about it, what that would be then would be the actual values of the bump sensors. And since we care about all 6 of the bump sensors, we need to just read all 6 of the bump sensors. So while this is a falling edge interrupt, we're still pulling for the information from the bump sensors. So we're going to actually pass in the results of a function into our bump task. And if we looked at bump task in our lab 14 edge, our bump task is going to be the collision. So let's see, in lab 14.c, we have void collision, and that's going to bring in a unsigned integer 8-bit bump sensor, which is going to be the value of our bumps. So we can call the bump read, so we need to put bump read in our bump int.c, but our bump read then is going to be exactly what our bump read was in the past. So that's, so up here, so this is within our port 4 IRQ handler. First thing we have to do is clear the flag, which we saw previously, and then we're going to call our bump task, which is going to be the collision, and we're going to pass in the results of bump read, which is going to give us our values of the bump sensors. Hopefully that makes sense. You'll see pretty good comments in the code, the starter code. Make sure you grab the starter code. It's all uploaded already, so make sure you grab that. So what is this current state of our timers after lab 14? So we're going to throw in our edge triggered interrupts, port 4, which is going to free up timer A1 because previously we were periodically checking the bump sensors from timer A1. So now we're going to use timer A1 to drive the motor, or to drive the robot. Pulse width modulation, and the PWMC and motor C is still using timer A0 to actually provide the signals, just like we did last lab. But we're going to use timer A1 to change the pulse widths so that we can have like a controller that's going to go through and it's going to take it from like going straight to left to right at a certain rate. And we're going to see that in the lab. So this is going to be the current state. We're going to have the motor control through timer A0, edge triggered interrupts to read from the bumps, and then timer A1 then is going to be changing what the robot's doing at a rate of 1 milliseconds. All right, that's it for the video. Hopefully this is all making sense. This is a lot of stuff, but it is, we're going to practice it in the lab, and hopefully it's all coming together at this point. All right, we'll see you guys next time. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, share, whatever things you do. Later.